I am thrilled to be joined by Josh Levy, who is the co-founder and CEO of Document Crunch, that Fifthwall is an investor in. And we've been an investor in basically every round you've done, including your Series B. And so really thrilled to talk to you about your business and everything you're seeing. But Josh, maybe just start with your background and Document Crunch.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be here. I wish I could say that I had some long and illustrious career in tech, but I actually kind of came into this position at Document Crunch like bottoms up, right, Brandon? So I was a construction management major at the University of Florida undergrad. I, did internships for a bunch of big contractors and kind of decided I didn't want to be a project manager. So I did what a lot of confused kids do. I went to law school and I ended up just fortuitously in construction law. So exclusively practiced construction law my entire career. Started out in private practice for a couple of really great firms down in South Florida, where I'm from. And 10 years ago, a very large general contractor here in Atlanta, where I am today, brought me in-house. So that's J. Dunn Construction, and our top 15 contractor. The Southeast region where I was, responsible for, it grew quite a bit in my time there. And I was fortunate to grow with it and ended up, running that legal department and serving kind of in that executive role there. Anyway, I kind of started reading about this stuff called AI about 7 or 8 years ago and how big law firms were using it for deal diligence and whatnot. And the first thought I had was, wow, this company, J. Dunn, is growing a lot, and just my job is getting harder, the volume of bid activity and whatnot. And so I came into that with that very myopic mindset. I was just looking like, what can I use to leverage my myself as providing, legal counsel and whatnot for this company. But one day, it all kind of clicked for me as I was kind of going on that journey. I had an office at J. Dunn, kind of like the one I'm in here now in our headquarters, where I had clear glass kind of doors, and I would just have a line of people pacing outside my office every single day with like a hard hat in one hand and a piece of paper in the other hand. And it all clicked for me because construction is very unique. Like, even if you had someone like me in-house negotiating all your contracts for you, which 99.99999% of this $14 trillion industry does not. But even if you did, even for the 0.1% of the companies that did, all of the risk is actually in the field. Because even if you set the contract up the right way or you have a fair bid that's going in, the folks in the field still need to administer that the right way. So I'll give you an example. It looks like it's about to rain right now in Atlanta outside. So you would have paid me $700 an hour to get you time and money if Wallace Construction experienced a rain delay. But if Brandon, the project manager, didn't know that he got time and money, or didn't give notice the right way, or didn't, feel confident to ask, Wallace Construction may be eating that cost. And that would be the best case for Wallace Construction, because construction's got thin margins and you don't want to give away entitlements. But the bigger story is that actually is the fundamental reason for disputes in our industry, which impact all stakeholders. So these unclear, hard to understand contract documents, project documents, and the inability of project teams and stakeholders to comply with those documents is like the number one driver of disputes. So in the best case, it's no, Brandon just didn't get time and money and the project wasn't as profitable. The worst case is when the paperwork doesn't match the story and then a dispute arises. And so anyway, I just saw a very clear need to really amplify risk management and democratize knowledge really across the entire construction ecosystem. And that led to the founding of Document Crunch. And these are really the problems that we're solving for Document Crunch. It starts with that democratization of knowledge, but then it helps automate workflows and ensure that best practices are being followed. So not only do you have a fair contract, but Brendan knows that he needs to give time, or he needs to give notice when it rains, to keep himself clean and to keep the project clean and to keep fee in his job. And that's what we're really solving for.
And for people that just aren't as familiar with construction, maybe just give me a sense of like how problematic are disputes and how big a problem are disputes in this industry?
Yeah, so let's start with what precedes disputes. So I think Procore recently, so for those of you who aren't familiar with construction, arguably the largest construction software company in the world, the last few years they did a study. I think 50% of projects in the world are finishing over budget or over schedule. 50%.
Wow.
What does that mean? That means that 50% of the time, some person who was excited about that project, a contractor, a developer, an architect, a lender, an insurance carrier, 50% of the time, one or more of those stakeholders is going to have to actually pay more money to finish that thing than they thought they would when they signed up to do it. Like they had a performer that said X, and 50% of the time, they're going to have to pay more. Someone's going to have to pay more. So that's a really big issue. Like you have the who's going to pay more than they thought they would sweepstakes on 50% of the projects.
Right.
And in that condition, confusion of when shit inevitably happens, for lack of a better way to say this, on a project, 50% of the time, who's responsible and who did what to gain entitlement is completely born in the contract documents. So this is a massive problem. And the cost of this problem is only increasing every year in our country. I think we just saw a study came out. The average cost right now of a dispute in the US is $65 million. That's enough to bankrupt most companies. So it's like, you only have to have one of these, and Wallace Construction is out of business. And so anyway, it's a really big problem.
And so obviously your vision has evolved and gotten bigger over time. And part of that vision is zero disputes, right? And can you explain what does that mean and how does Document Crunch enable that?
Yeah, so I take this vision that we've had, and it's become clarified really over the last years. We've seen the impact of what we're doing. You think a lot about like construction and this idea that maybe 50, 60, 70 years ago, we would have been on this video call if it existed. We would have been talking about, construction's inherently unsafe. And part of the cost of doing business in construction is that people are going to get hurt, right? And somewhere along the way, our industry decided that it had enough with that. Why? Because it learned about proactive measures or technology such as this thing called hard hats or safety boots became cost effective. Preventative measures, proactive knowledge sharing of best practices started to formulate, and the industry decided it had enough. And it went on this big movement. And we now know today that culturally interwoven into every construction company out there, every job, every practice, every workflow is that it's not okay to suffer an injury. Like we're not okay accepting this idea that construction is inherently unsafe. I think a very analogous situation exists with what we were just talking about, like disputes. I believe that with appropriate democratization of knowledge and like proactive risk management, we can drive disputes just like injuries down to zero. It's aspirational. Does the construction industry have zero safety incidents today? No, but they've plummeted over the course of time. And we celebrate this idea that companies work more safely. And of course, there's good business reason to work more safely, right? You've taken a lot of transaction costs out of the industry by the way of everything from just like the direct costs of these issues, lost productivity, litigation, you name it, insurance, costs of insurance. Like all of these are great benefits of driving injuries down. And the same thing can happen with disputes. And so I think a lot about like, again, the same study that talked about the cost of disputes, the two core reasons for disputes in our industry today. And these have been the two core reasons, by the way, the last 5 years by this study are two things. Inconsistent project documents is the number one reason for disputes. Number two reason for disputes, root cause, the failure of project stakeholders to administer or comply with their contractual obligations during the course of construction. And so I think a lot about, again, like analogizing to the safety movement. So what can we do? What can we do to clarify and start with like knowledge transfer? Because again, if somebody understands what they're supposed to do, I believe that rational actors will make a good choice. So how do I get knowledge to those people that were pacing outside my office every single day? in a more efficient way.
And how do you do that? Like what
Yeah,
is the product that does that?
it's very much consistent with like the founding like product of Document Crunch. So we started with the construction contract, and using AI, we were able to start breaking down construction contracts, making them super easy for anyone in our industry to understand and essentially digest, which I believe is, again, that's the root cause of problems are these unclear or hard to understand contract documents. And so that's where we started at Document Crunch. And what we've continued to do is broaden that aperture to not just be about contracts. We're not contract crunch, we're document crunch. And so projects are built on this constellation of documents, which are known as contract documents. That's specifications, that's drawings, that's insurance documents, that's change orders, that's lien waivers, that's RFIs. So there's all these interrelated web of complex documents. And so what we've also done, and where you've seen great broadening of the use of our product, is we've started crunching all these other doc types as well. So that's really where we started, the knowledge. The second phase, and what's kind of key to us, is not just like bringing off the shelf knowledge and perspective, which is certainly helpful if you're a small company that doesn't have resources like me, but starting to then tie your enterprise standards and best practices as a lens on top of those workflows. And so we find ourselves there today. But where we're ultimately going is, I like to say I'm a boxing fan, and Mike Tyson, he always talked about everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. So we're really good at setting up that rules engine or that knowledge base from the onset. You must set up your project for success at the onset, before you sign the thing, during pre-construction, whatever. But then what happens when something happens out there? How do you trigger and remind the appropriate stakeholders that they need to apply that same rule set during the course of construction?
What's like an example of that? Like what's like something that would change midstream that requires reconciling all those documents?
It's raining today.
Right.
And in order to get entitlement, you must give notice appropriately. And today, Document Crunch will draft that notice for you so that it's contractually compliant, so that it's the right work product, so that you leave no doubt as to what your entitlement is. And if you do that, the rational actor on the other side, the owner, the architect, they're not going to dispute you because you've papered this thing the right way. You've clearly gained entitlement based on the very clear rules of your project. And that's all that gray. That's that second area, the failure to comply. So, okay, we've set up the contract the right way, but if you don't give notice the right way, now you're giving an opening for the other side to say, hey, it said you had to give notice this way, you didn't. I don't want to pay you for this. I don't want to win I have to pay more than I was supposed to sweepstakes because you didn't do your part. But we want to eliminate that ambiguity during the course of construction.
And what role does like real-time data play in this? Like that's what I'm actually really curious about. Is it if it rains, that's something that can happen instantaneously. Like how fast does that echo through the platform?
Yeah, today we're in the earliest innings of that real-time data. So again, like we're very much in that knowledge kind of base setup, which is expanding to all these doc types. But you could see where this is absolutely going, Brendan, which is that we will automate actions based on real-time data inputs that are stemming from those areas that are the biggest causes of disputes. So I talked about like weather. The broader category is what are the events that trigger delays? That's a common area of disputes. What are the areas that trigger design or scope gaps? That's another area of dispute. And so, this vision of an industry with zero disputes is purposefully broad because there's a lot of pretty big categories to sink our teeth into over the long run. And that's exactly where we're going.
And how do you view kind of Document Crunch as playing a role in the broader arc of like the whole project life cycle? So from where you started, obviously, to where you are today, where does that go?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're seeing it like in the product engagement. So, the really neat thing about what's happening at Document Crunch today is I don't know very many applications that have a ubiquitous use case within the persona base of a construction company, within the entire persona base, right? You've got applications that maybe the legal and risk team use. That's kind of like where Document Crunch started with that, like, hey, we can automate the review of construction contracts before you sign them. You've got software that maybe project managers use or pre-construction departments use. But at the end of the day, this need to set the project up for success and then administer it is across the entire project lifecycle. And what you're now seeing is Document Crunch being picked up and used by personas across the project lifecycle. The fastest growing segment that we have right now is in pre-construction, right? So if like we were like 100% legal and risk a few years ago, pre-construction teams are now like entering into our platform every day. But I'd be remiss if I didn't say we've been rolled out on 7,000 projects.
Wow.
in the last year, as we started moving further and further into application for project teams to administer their projects appropriately during construction.
What are some like the best case studies you've seen just like in the product so far that have proven out, like say, avoiding a very big potential dispute?
Yeah, we actually just had a customer feedback yesterday talking about a manual review of a specifications. They didn't realize that there were 2 elevators that they needed to provide. And so with Document Crunch, they were able to pick up that mistake that a human had made. And they called us. I think it was the president called our team and said, that was a $75,000 gotcha that you just prevented me from having to eat. Right. And that's like a great example of how this works. But, you know, we hear every single day, like, we didn't used to be able to put the appropriate risk management like process in place around all these different aspects of our job. We were exposed. So think about like going back to the safety analogy. What we're hearing is you're almost putting like a digital hard hat around our operations. And so that's a great story. Of course, we hear all the time that we've helped automate people's ability to do their work by up to 80% on like the contract side and specification side in particular. But I'm actually much more interested in the prevention of issues like, oh, I didn't see that buried on page 672, but you did, and you just saved us
Right.
from accepting someone's bid that would have left us exposed, or from submitting our own bid where we had a gap in our price or in our scope.
What's the hardest thing to educate, this industry, construction, that, is, I would say, not the most tech forward industry? What's the hardest thing from your perspective in educating that industry about what your product does and why it's so important?
That's a great question. I think it's based on like the phases of our growth. As you know, we've gained pretty widespread adoption within the industry now. So I think the challenge that we have today is maybe a little different than where we started. I think when we started this thing, and I've been, at this now, I've been the CEO for 4.5 years. 4.5 years ago, it was, can you please convince us that this stuff works? Like, how can we trust what you're doing? It was a very skeptical audience
at a technological level, meaning they didn't trust that you could actually do this reconciliation.
Exactly. And we really had the double whammy, Brandon. We didn't just have the construction industry, which is historically a little skeptical and slow to adopt, but we were selling into legal and risk management, who's also in its own right historically skeptical and slow to adopt. So that was a pretty tough threshold to get over in the early days, and we had to earn that one customer at a time, right? And so that was like a very hard thing, that had to be earned. You don't just get to announce, oh, we're really great, everyone should use us. It doesn't happen that way. So I would say that was the hardest. Like that was our toughest sledding early on. I think today, because of the success that we had early on, there's been a bit of market education now, and this isn't just a legal tool. This is actually a tool for my entire operation. The great news is, again, like I say, that's the hardest thing. We've seemed to have broken through over the last year there, and you could just see the product engagement just completely flipping on its head now in terms of like the percentage of users who are outside of that original cohort of legal and risk.
How do you think your experience as a lawyer kind of really helped inform the product? Meaning, what would have been harder to build about this if you didn't have that law experience?
Yeah, I mean, look, I of course, my vision drives the product roadmap, right? And so I'm not somebody who came here to saying, oh, look at this. There's a big total addressable market that could use to be digitized and disrupted. So I'm here from out of my MBA program and I'm formulating like a thesis on paper about how to solve problems for this industry. As I tell my product team all the time, when we're thinking about hard problems, I simply just close my eyes and revert back to the experience. So I talked about what would happen when I was behind closed doors earlier in this discussion, but let me talk about what would happen when I would maybe get up to go get a drink or use the restroom or something. We had an open office concept at J&M. In fact, today I was texting with some of the executives I used to work with there. So I'd be walking down the hall and I would see someone head down, look on their face, big stack of paper. And I would put my hand on their shoulder and I'd say, what are you working on? What can I help you with? And that's the exact type of product experience that we're building at Document Crunch. And so I guess to answer your question, it's not just from my experience as a lawyer, but from my deep experience just operating in this industry, working with these stakeholders that we want using the product and solving the problems that I've lived with for over my decade.
Yeah.
In this industry.
What are you most excited about in the next year?
I feel confident to say that at this point in time, we're, top 2 or 3 fastest growing content companies ever. So that's awesome. But what is so odd, I was on with one of our investors last night. What is so odd to me is knowing all the success that we've had, I actually feel like we're in day one right now because the momentum and the massive expansion of the value prop that we've seen over the last period of time, it just feels like we haven't even gotten to that exponential growth yet. It seems like we're like in the earliest days of it. So I'm very proud of the dent that we've made in the industry to date. I am. And it's not just like the business and the product. We built a hell of a team and been able to attract some great talent, but it's pretty incredible to see momentum increasing right now and understanding just how big of a problem this is and just how big of a market this is. It's like beyond anything I could have ever imagined when I started this thing 4.5 years ago.
Well, we're, on fifthwall's side, we were just super excited to be, supporters and investors, and obviously love everything that you're doing. And, I think we see a lot in the construction space, and I agree with everything you're saying. I think it's a really powerful proposition that you've developed, and it's awesome to see just all the success that you've had. So, Josh, congrats on it all.
Thanks so much. And look, it takes a village and partners like you all and, the crunchers, our investors. Like this is why I believe we've had the success, a little bit of luck. But it just, you continue to connect with great people. And I think a lot of our power and our momentum comes from that.
Yeah. Well, excited to see what's next.
Yeah. Thanks so much.